Good evening, everyone. I'm Julie Lytle. I have been the Executive Director of the Episcopal Province of New England, and we're glad to have you join us tonight for Deacons Talking on the Road to Emmaus. Deacons Talking is a joint offering from the New England Deacons Conference and the Episcopal Province of New England. And it's based on the understanding of Jesus walking along the road to Emmaus with two disciples who did not recognize them until much later in their walk and journey. Jesus' presence led them to release their fear and grief after seeing him crucified and to return to Jerusalem to share their experience of the resurrected Christ with the gathered community, thus renewing their ministry with great confidence. We're glad to be able to share with the confidence that Deacon Robin Hollis and Deacon Scott Deasy have had in celebrating the ministries that they've been doing with people on the margins, listening to the voices on the margins and responding in diocesan efforts as a Jesus movement to oppression. Robin has been at St. James Episcopal Church in Tempe, Arizona, and is the Director of Deacon Formation for the Episcopal Diocese of Arizona. Scott was ordained a vocational deacon in 2012 and serves at the Church of the Epiphany in Flagstaff. Together, they're going to lead our conversation, starting with prayer. So, Robin, please lead us, and we thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you, folks, for being with us. Yes, we're going to start with the prayer for social justice. So, the Lord be with you. Let us pray. Grant, O God, that your holy and life-giving Spirit may so move every human heart, and especially the hearts of the people of this land, that barriers which divide us may crumble, suspicions disappear, and hatred cease, that our divisions being healed, we may live in justice and peace, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. Okay, so welcome to our presentation, and we're going to get started here. Where to go? There's my arrow. So the first thing we were going to ask is to do a little bit of reflection. This presentation was presented at the Triennial Conference, and at the time as folks were gathering, we had a special reflection card, and we asked them to think on these two questions and to make some notes at this point in time. So we were going to ask those on the phone if you would want to take just a minute or two, and if you feel so moved, you could make some notes in the chat box, or you could just take a minute or two and identify that information for yourself. So again, at the workshop, we did ask folks to turn to their neighbor and share a little bit about how they identified with those being or living on the margins, and then also how they felt they were being called. If there's anyone on the phone who would care to share, you can do so in the chat, or you can unmute and share with us now.
This is Beatrice Kaigwa. I just came on the conversation. I don't know where it started. So may I know what you are asking us to share?
Yes, there were two questions, kind of a self-reflection as we started to center on this conversation. And the first one is to share how you identify with being or living at the margins. And then the second question was, how are we called to embody hope as the body of Christ and as a member of the Jesus movement? It's something,
okay.
And you can come back to this at a later time as well, but we were just hoping to get folks sort of centered on some of these thoughts as we move through this presentation.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking. Okay, so Scott, I'm going to move on. How we got here. So this Voices from the Margin initiative, how we got here is that there was, and has been a focus on reconciliation and anti-racism training. And so as we all know, there are some canonical requirements for that as well. But the Anti-Racism Committee within the Diocese of Arizona brought together all of the ministry groups and invited them to participate in this discussion so that we could come together using our strengths and looking for ways to collaboratively work and to have a significant impact within the diocese and the communities that we serve. So we actually held a specific workshop on November 4th in 2017. Bishop was with us, and we actually did a Eucharist, some singing, and then jumped into issues, dialogue, and ended up coming up with a plan of action. And we had folks that stood up to be part of this and to move forward. So at the gathering, what we specifically identified was encouraging our diocese to be courageous in taking social action, and then also how we can collaborate not only within the diocese, but with community partners in order to affect the types of changes that we need to move forward. So that's a little bit of our history of where we were. And the pictures you see there were from the workshop that day as we were getting started. We had a really great turnout, had a wonderful lunch too, and it was really a day full of inspiration and hope. So one of the ways that when we were trying to do this, we had to put together resources, and this is something that you could do in your diocese or in your parish. We went through and identified and inventoried as much of the resources, or many of the resources that were available to us at that time in 2017. Since that time, there's been an explosion of the types of resources that are out there for us. We did focus on the beloved community, and we were looking for ways to incorporate what was happening within the Jesus movement and where we were going, just as a diocese, what some of our charges and charters had been. We went through and identified folks that could be a part of this, and also how you could actually take the pulse of your parish to really see what the key issues were. And then we also looked at financial and human capital issues as well. We did prepare a supplemental guide for this presentation, and I believe that's been emailed to everyone. And if you didn't get it, Julie can make sure you can contact Julie and she can get you a copy of it. And it's got a list of books and videos and other types of articles and information that we pulled together to help support what we were doing here. And they were sort of the highlights of what we had put together. So when we say refer to the supplemental guide, that's what we're talking about, is we did create a supplement for this presentation. We also, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, my turn.
I know.
So it's important to kind of back up a little bit. In a meeting like this, the frame is terribly important, which is what we were starting out when we were asking people to reflect and interact with each other about how they fit into the issue of a marginalized community, or at least their appreciation of it. The other part of it is this idea of house rules. This is a very difficult topic to discuss, as we all have, I'm sure, discovered more than once. And so it's important for everybody to have a common agreement on how we're going to approach difficult subjects and how we're going to approach each other, especially when we don't agree. The first one up here is this idea of a culture of inquiry, which is a safe environment. We're asking questions. We're not, and we're trying to learn from each other. We're not trying to change each other at that point. And then the other part of it is modeled basically on those of us who've gone through education for ministry, to have the ground rules that we all agree on beforehand, which include confidentiality, being an active listener, to participate, to respectfully disagree when necessary, and some of the kind of basic housekeeping things about being on time and beginning, and I think probably the most important thing in some ways is beginning and ending each meeting with prayer as a way of framing this discussion. To those of you who have been involved in community organizing, you will find that a lot of what we're doing here is mirroring that kind of work. And so we have to acknowledge part of, the challenges. And so we have an idea of barriers and fears, and these are things that actually have come out of sessions. This fear of disunity, of being blamed. It's a big problem for some segments of our community, is feeling that they're being blamed for things. This sense of inevitability or frustration that racism may never end. This fallback on that this is human nature, this is our, this is part of our problem, so to speak. We have to have problems with power imbalances, blind spots that we all carry, prejudices that we carry and don't necessarily acknowledge. We can find ourselves in situations of bullying and in conversations like this. Violence from racism is a real problem, obviously, in the country right now. Question of who you are, the idea of unconscious impulses versus unconscious actions, judgment, none of us want to be judged. This question about what tomorrow will bring, being frightened over your own anger, what's going to happen next, inability to think before acting, and feeling out of control over the rise of racism are all barriers and fears that, to one degree or another, along with others we haven't listed, are the elephants in the room at the very least. This is balanced, however, with expectations and hopes, because that's, at the end of the day, where we want to be going. And we start out with some kind of basic things like being able to live with each other and not kill each other. And then moving on to things like respect for the individual and everybody's uniqueness, individuality. This concept that is terribly important, and that is the recognition of the face of Jesus in all people we interact with. Looking for ways of transformation, for peace, patience, the idea of spreading compassion or deeper humility, to fight against this nature that we all carry of judgmentalisms, to never lose hope, a challenge, I know, but it is so important. Better care for our environment, as well as our people, deeper awareness, and an important thing, especially for, I think, for deacons, is better listening. How do we act, or how can we develop the skills of active listening and constructive listening rather than sitting there waiting for our next retort when somebody's speaking to us? You're on mute, Robin.
It just reminded me. So our agenda for the day, this gives you a highlight. And again, this is something that you could use in your parish, with one of your ministry groups or your diocese. So we had some liturgical highlights. We started with the Indigenous Four Directions. We sang "What Does the Lord Require of You" and around, which was actually very beautiful. And I will share with you that this was a wonderful representation of laity, clergy, and as I said, and our bishop was present with us for this entire day, and really we had the dean of the cathedral, and it really made a big difference to have all of the different ministries represented as well. We shared 3 personal stories. There was a very brief kind of thing of testimony, if you will, but it was in a way of evangelizing too what had happened and really sort of setting the tone. We did a quick review of resources and literature. We had set up table groups. We had facilitators that we had worked with ahead of time, and so there was facilitated table discussion. We did some priority setting, getting up and walking around and using flip charts and sticky notes and stars and stickers and voting and markers. We ended with a call to action, and then we actually had a new steering committee. The process worked very well. We did a blessing of this new committee, and then at the end, we sent out an evaluation as well. We did a day of evaluation as folks were leaving, as well as sending them an evaluation to capture any additional thoughts, concerns, questions they may have. And then what happened was this team of voices from the margin that came together ended up becoming and morphing into, or really working with, Cruzando Fronteras. And I believe that was done earlier this year in March, I think, Julie. We did, you heard about our immigration. Roger Babnu was the convener for that. And so this group began to see immigration was becoming even more important in our community here in Arizona. And so that became the big focus of this particular group for Voices of the Margin. We do have a detailed agenda in the supplemental guide that goes into a lot more detail, timing, and some of the subtasks that were involved in pulling this all together. But we wanted you to see that there is a blueprint here that you can use or modify. So then what we did when we were doing the facilitated discussion and worked in table groups, we began identifying priorities using a strategic facilitation process. And this gives you an idea of some of the flip charts were up, and you see some of the big stickies we used. We used little stickies, all different kinds. But what we came out with is these were the 7 priorities that this group of individuals identified and wanted to come together and work on as a diocese. So talking about political action, talking about how we bring that awareness of training, education, and resources, but we also wanted the voice of the youth. We wanted individuals to be able to take personal action, ongoing communication, and certainly reaching out to the communities in which we live and serve, and then also the importance of prayer as we went through this and continue to go through this today.
So the next part of this being the visions is going back to goals and so forth. So you see here the first 2 on this slide. We're looking at diocesan-wide network of social justice teams. To start with, a social justice academy, team networks, resources, and also to work for a diocesan position on this. Again, this mirrors much of organizing in terms of advocacy. And then also engaging in social action in the tradition of the prophets of the Hebrew Bible and Jesus of Nazareth in the New Testament. We're talking about the prophetic voice and developing that and sharing that within our communities and outside. And so step 1 is to try to identify champions and to rise up intentional leaders. We want to, this is the sort of thing where the leadership is not necessarily those wearing collars or in leadership positions in other parts of the church, but those who are called to leadership, those who hear it and feel the need to raise their voice in their lives to dealing with this. And this is really kind of the organizing ability, is to try to identify the human resources available. And then also discuss this with leadership. Part of the problem is part of the issue is you want to have support for those people who are being raised up. And we also want to have those who are working with them be aware of what the goals and processes are, to frame the question here. And then to go outside and look for community and parish concerns for the marginalized. And part of this is that depending on where you live, you have a different group of people on the margins. So I'm a border community in northern Arizona, and so we live right next to the Navajo Hopi Reservation. That's a somewhat different demographic than, for example, people living in the south side of Chicago or other parts of the country. The second step is to start organizing. And part of this would be within the diocese, where you would have facilitated meetings, you'd have discussion and planning, and critical to any organizing, especially in difficult situations like this, are relationships. And so building relationships in terms of knowing where resources are, but also building relationships in terms of knowing people and their needs and desires and their fears. They're always approaching this from a perspective of discernment. We want to identify and uncover spiritual gifts in people. We want to empower them. We want to lift up their voices and support them. And then, as I mentioned earlier, you want to individualize it to the community's needs and the nature of the community's problems. And then we also, going from a diocesan level to the parish level, we want to have parish workshops And these are not brief meetings, they're not exceptionally long, but roughly 2-hour meetings to have an opportunity to share a vision or even create a consensus vision for that locale. Listen to the stories and concerns, identify together as a group and what we'll plan in action, whether it's to join a protest, initiate letter writing or telephone campaigns or petitions. And another option would be to help a partner in another parish plan an action on the issue the community feels it needs to address. So the idea is that we're not a silo. We are trying to work with others, and because the reality is, if we do, we're going to be more effective. Next part is to commit to be part of the diocesan approach to this, and identifying resources and leadership members who can participate at that level. The goal of any of these meetings, as is underlined here in yellow, is that it's for people to leave empowered and know that with God's help and in community they can do this. The challenge that we all face is a sense of being overwhelmed, of futility. And to the degree that we as leaders can remind people that we have a few aces, namely our faith and our relationship with each other and with God, that we are in a particularly important position to advance these issues.
And we talked about, then we talked about what's next. So in this day-long time that we were spending together, as we were identifying and really building the foundation of a team to work within the diocese and our communities, what were some of the areas that we need to look for the future? So how do we sustain this focus, and how do we sustain those that are leading it? Where do we get the money from? How is that going to work? What does the budget look like? And leadership plan. How do we ensure people don't get burned out in trying to work in this area, because it can be very taxing on you emotionally. And so we want to make sure that we've got some strong leadership plans, and that we have a lot of leadership that's shared, and raising up those that feel called for that. In terms of making sure ongoing communication, education, what does success look like, and then tapping into the church-wide network, the policy Episcopal Policy Network, the UTO, community organizing, or community organizations, including community organizing ones. Here in Arizona, we have a couple of them in each of our regions. In Central Phoenix, for instance, we have something called Valley Interfaith Project. We work very closely with them on identifying human development agendas, and then how we can all work together in supporting those issues and the planks, if you will. And then also perhaps include it as an offering for Christian formation for all. We're excited that part of what was coming out of this is that in the Deacon Formation Academy, we had already, the faculty had already identified that we wanted to do something with social justice, but after this particular session in November of 2017, we implemented a social justice course that has been extremely popular. In fact, we're expanding it as we continue with that. And actually, Scott is one of the facilitators or the faculty members of that particular class. So we've actually now embedded it in our Deacon Formation Academy. It's an opportunity to share the gospel and the stories, and then also build a rapid response team. How can we respond to issues when we've got protests or policy issues or legislative issues occurring at our capital? Where do we need to be? Where do we need to be on the border when we're having refugees come across? What do we need to do to pull that together? And so those were some of the areas that we said, how do we begin to ensure this so that this truly is institutionalized, and we're able to have it adaptable to the needs and concerns of our communities and the people within our diocese, and how can we move that forward? So one of the things we did within the workshop, and we wanted to do today, if you happen to have your phone handy, we were going to try a little bit of an interactive polling. Yeah, Scott's modeling it for you. So if you take your phone out, and actually in the two, you're going to send a chat or a message, if you will, a text message to 22333. And then in the body of where you would normally put your message, you'll just key in VFM 19 and then press enter. And you should get it'll take a little minute or two, but you'll get a message back saying you joined, Robin Hollis's session of VFM, Voices from the Margin 19. So if you want to take out your phones and do that, and then we'll play with the poll. We have just two poll questions for you. This was something that we've used on a very large scale. In fact, we've used this type of technology even at our diocesan convention this year. So we found that this was very helpful in getting a lot of information quickly from folks. So to give you a little bit of, again, these are the instructions, but to give you a little test to see how we're doing is we're going to ask you to answer this question. So all you need to do is since once you've logged in, then you just put in the letter and hit enter in that text message box. And then it begins to let us know who's all there. Good job, everyone. And so then when we're done, we're going to lock the poll. And then we'll go on to the next one. So then what we asked is since this was given to deacons, we were asking what is the role of the deacon in this process. So what we asked is that go ahead now and type in a word that you think describes. Okay, sorry, if you don't have a smartphone, use the chat box and we'll collect your answers. You can just type in the chat box. When we were in the workshop itself, we had people sharing information. Got it, Catherine, thank you. And you can see that the way this works, this is building what we call a word cloud. And so the more answers that are of the same, it'll get bigger and bigger. And there we go. All right, I'm going to go ahead and lock the poll right now. And then this is actually the one that came out of the workshop that day. So you can see a lot of the similar responses that you were just putting in. This is what was actually, these were the results that we got that day when we did the workshop at the triennial. So again, gives you an idea of how people are thinking and where the pulse is in the room. So we really enjoy this kind of way of gathering information. You can type leave in the text message box now, and then that'll take you out of the polling. One of the other areas that we wanted to share with everyone was a leadership charge. And this was actually written and delivered by Reverend David Chavez that day at our Voices from the Margin workshop in November of 2017. And he actually wrote this, and this became sort of our mantra, if you will. And when we had those reflection cards, when we were having you do the reflections in the actual workshop, it was a two-sided card. So on the front had those questions, and on the back it had this leadership charge. So Scott, if you want to kind of walk us through the key takeaways of this particular charge.
Well, David was a deacon at this point in time when he wrote this. He's since been ordained. He's one of our, we call tent maker priests to a degree. He's now in charge of, help me, Robin, border ministries, is that right?
Yes, well, he has responsibility for, yes, all the border, bringing all together. This Voices from the Margin, Cruzando Fronteras, our Hispanic ministries, he's focusing all in those areas.
So this reflects at a very high level how our diocese is looking at these issues. And so obviously we want to approach this, this work to justice through love and mercy, and as a walk with God. We want people to listen first, to listen to stories, to listen to the urgencies of our world, and really just spend the time to be a recipient of information and understanding need. They also we need to be faithful in our meetings and diligent, that it reflects the hopes and the longing of our beloved and diverse diocesan community. In this state, we have, geographically, it's a very large state, and we are an incredibly diverse group, actually, although still with a lot of gray hair, as we all know. Then we also, the idea of a summary statement and a plan of action, that we can't just sit and listen, and we also need to advocate. And to do this through discernment, through thoughtful and transformative strategies, and to express the practices of God's kingdom of grace, radical welcome, and justice. And so, as he puts here in the last sentence in bold, as a summary, we are to engage, educate, inspire, shape, mobilize new generations of thoughtful and transformative leaders. This is a building program. And this is not terribly effective in this environment, but the idea is that at the end of anything, we need to be able to declare as a group that we can do this. I can do this. I can do this with the others around me. That the issues that we're dealing with, although challenging at the very least, are within our abilities. And the other part of it is to take ownership of this whole process. That are agents of change. This is not for us to sit and think about and over a couple glasses of wine and then go back to our normal lives. This is a call for us to be active in this whole process. And I say this with capital letters and explanation points.
So this was our closing slide in order to training a herd of raptors is hard. Try herding a group of deacons. And then we have a list of folks that you can contact, and some of those are in your supplemental guide as well. We have a new co-chair for our anti-racism team, and we're excited about what that looks like. So with that, we're open for even more questions now, Julie. And I may be having to switch to my phone because I think my battery is about ready to die.
I'm going to suggest that folks maintain being muted so that we don't get background noise. I have muted some of you, so if you've had any trouble, just type in the chat that you're trying to get online and I will unmute you if you can't unmute yourself. We really appreciate this interesting conversation, and what I want to do is to start by asking a question that came from the registration questions that folks posted. There's obviously a need to engage across orders to be able to do the kind of work you're calling us and catalyzing us as deacons to be engaged in. And there were some questions about how do you really get engagement from the priests, from the laity, with the diaconal community to make something really move and have a passion that gets catalyzed across the diocese. And we'd love to hear any experience you've had in trying to do that kind of networking.
Scott, you want to take that?
I can begin. The anti-racism committee has been functioning at a level for 20 years or so in Arizona, and it was led initially by a core of laity who have been pushing very hard to the clergy and to the rest of the community. In more recent years, we've had a growth of members of the diaconal community and the priestly orders to become more engaged in this. And so right now, the committee that functions in Arizona for anti-racism has about 20 people on it, and it is well balanced between nationality, sex, orders, laity, and the like. And so part of this is just, you have to have an agitator at the beginning, which is what our former chairman has been for years. And then also finally starting to find the people who have the passion, which is where we're at right now. I don't know if that answers it, but.
I think you did a great job. Thank you.
If anyone doesn't want to voice their question, feel free to chat questions and I can repeat them for everybody. I'm curious too, as we're talking, what have you found to be your greatest successes and your greatest challenges? You've identified a lot of the obstacles with the chart at the beginning, but how do you get the movement from those obstacles into movement so that you can get beyond them?
Robin, let me start with a success, I think, and that's the border ministry. As was pointed out, this organizing that occurred now 2 years ago was quickly essentially diverted into a pressing need, which was the border situation. And the people who had organized to look and work on these issues were already prepared and actually jumped right in. They jumped right in to organize not only resource management, clothes, diapers, all the things that you need to run a shelter, but also medical services, arts and crafts services, and the like. And that came out of just simply this meeting in November and the fact that people were engaged, knew each other, and had a need to act quickly. And that was pretty much done diocesan leadership level. I mean, the diocese has come into it, but this was really all run from the committee and people who volunteered and felt the need to do something.
It really came out of the November 4th catalyst meeting, if you will. The laity that stepped up to really begin to put this together. And at that point, as we said, we ended up identifying that the border ministry was really where the big focus was at that point. And there were enough individuals involved throughout the diocese that passion, communication, and education began to occur. And it was amazing the number of individuals that stepped up to be a part of it. So we feel that we were truly guided by the Spirit and that God had a hand in everything that we were doing. And within so many of our parishes, they began, in fact, we had so many people wanting to help that it became more of an issue of how do you manage and still encourage individuals to want to be involved, but how do you manage those expectations and how do you keep, these huge numbers from going off and wanting to help so much that we needed to put some processes into place. And it may sound like bureaucracy. That's not what it was. It was just how can we be effective and efficient in trying to address this. So we were very fortunate just because people were moved and this was something that spoke to them. And the more dialogue we had, I think that was really important. And some of the trainings that we've done in the parish, and I can speak from my parish specifically, we did a wonderful training and went through a lot of this. And we've actually had people change their perspectives. And I've not really seen that happen where within 48 hours they came back and said, boy, I was totally misunderstanding what was going on. And I really realized my bias and my filter, and I'm going to do something about it. That is truly moving forward and with the Spirit in the way of love. And we just keep trying to continue to recognize that. So in a way, our biggest success was also our biggest challenge. How do we bring all these folks together? We put a steering committee together. We put transportation committees together. We put points of contact so that people could go to someone and get definitive responses and get answers that they needed quickly. So but it took some processes, it took some leadership, and it took people being humble. In other words, it was not ego-driven any way, shape, or form. And so that was really important, recognizing everyone's spiritual gifts and allowing them a chance to utilize them.
So if you think back at this presentation, we were talking about local leadership and developing leaders. I don't know how many people are familiar with what's going on the board, but it's a continually changing process. And people would find out, 12 hours before that 80 people are going to be dumped at one of our churches in Phoenix, which requires a fairly nimble organization and not a top-down organization. And so the people who had been developed as leaders are identified, self-identified and otherwise, at the meeting in November, were in a position to respond immediately, independent really of a hierarchy, although the hierarchy is definitely needed for some of the real basic stuff like transportation. So it worked out really well. The challenges have been obviously that it's still a difficult topic to talk about, and not all people or churches are comfortable enough to invite this topic into their hallowed halls.
Mm-hmm. Catherine has a follow-up question in our chat asking if there is any kind of a national church-wide group on border ministries that can serve both the southern border as well as the northern border that we might need to know about and could be supporting.
The Diocese of Arizona just had a border summit in November, and I'm answering this question in a roundabout way. There were about 200 participants from all over the country who attended, and 7 bishops, both from south of the border and north of the border. And during that 3-day conference I was at, I was not exposed to any organization like this. So my guess is no, although I could easily be wrong.
Well, and it also looks like Dottie's a part of Arizona's movement to be ordained as a deacon. She's not yet approved for the Deacon Academy, but she has a passion for being involved with the border issues. And she's curious, how do you get someone to help get a parish motivated?
Well, that certainly is something that she can contact Scott or myself or Monica, the name that's on the information that's on the PowerPoint. And we can certainly work with Dottie and with her parish and see what the best way is to help get that involved. That's probably the best way to start. I know that down in the southern part of the state, because I believe Dottie's in Sierra Vista, there is a lot going on down there. There's meetings that are held. And so certainly we can put the correct people in touch and work with her on that.
I want to go back to a bigger picture question. You have the blessing of too many people wanting to get involved and trying to organize that. What do you do when you're feeling like a lone ranger, or when there's just 1 or 2 voices that are jumping into something that feels passionate? How do you maintain the vision for working with those that are marginalized when you're feeling very isolated, alone, and trying to support those that are isolated and alone?
That's a great question, Julie. I think that happens in just about any kind of ministry that you would be in. And I would think that what I've learned from experience, and this is just personal, is that you have to recognize you can only do what you can do. That if you lead as a role model and do just a small bit, you can't boil the ocean, so to speak. But you can, if I still love the story of the starfish. If you can pick up 1 starfish and save them one at a time, then you've done your part. But you have to be willing to accept that. And you have to say, okay, I've done what I can. And then hopefully someone will see that and it will become contagious, or the term we use today, it'll go viral at some point. Mm-hmm. I don't know, Scott, if you have any other thoughts.
Well, I think what David was referring to in his statement that I read, this ability to listen, include yourself. to listen to others and to listen to yourself, and be honest. Getting back to what Robin said, what can you do and what can't you do? And be kind to yourself in the process, which is for a lot of us very difficult. We're goal oriented, we're success oriented.
That was the other question that I'd love to hear you reflect a little bit on. Last week I was reading the article in the Christian Century about a late vocation person in Philadelphia who was being ordained and assigned to a parish that had been closed. And he spent most of a year sitting on the steps, watching the patterns of life in his neighborhood before he started doing anything in the church that he was assigned to work with. And the kind of patience and perseverance that that takes, the kind of listening that we aren't trained to do. We're listening for when we can get a break in the sentence so we can add our 2 cents instead of listening for what the other person is really saying. How do you help people to cultivate the kind of skills to hear the voices on the margins that we really want to see beyond the setting of the context? How do you give people the tools to be able to just be present and listen?
I don't know that we have the answer to that. I mean, it's a difficult question because there's no good answer. An approach is to do it within yourself and try to model, and that's what we as deacons are here to do, is to try to have that model of prophetic voice, and that means listening.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any other answer to that, Robin.
Yeah, I would just say it gets back to that role model. I mean, these are tough questions, Julie.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, they're great questions, but I think they transcend whether it's you're working in voices from the margin, whether you're doing pastoral care. It's all about learning to do active listening. And certainly there are some techniques. We include that in our Deacon Formation Academy here. We actually go through some communication sessions. And we try to reiterate the need to listen and to do the active listening, or as we've come to call it, one of our faculty member terms it, holy listening. Mm-hmm. So if you can keep that in front of you, and as a reminder somehow, you know, we're human and we get passionate about certain things, and we also have to be aware of our own filters. So the more you know about yourself, and you know, and that's not easy. So it's not an easy thing to do, but I think that with awareness and training and communication and just practicing, I hopefully over time people would learn to do that.
For those of us that might not know a whole lot about what active listening is, or that might be watching online and wanting some resources, can you say a little bit more about what some of those techniques are, just to remind us and to help us to start practicing them, and to give us some pointers so that we can really hear the voices that we're needing to hear?
Well, I think Scott started by trying to explain it's being present. It's really trying to turn off everything that's going on around you. Don't be distracted, and being able to look at the individual. And if you're on the phone or like this on a video chat, actually looking at them, not trying to do your mail, not trying to do your text. And then you need to make sure that your thoughts, it's sort of like cleaning your palate. How do you clean your brain? So what we suggest is that people, in order to do the listening, that they paraphrase what they've heard in order to make sure before they even give some sort of a real response. So I understood you to say that, and then you say what it is and say, is that correct? You know, and allow them to make sure that you're listening. And sometimes people just want to talk. They don't necessarily even want a response. But at least if you're able to be present and not be distracted, and being able to look at them and to be there with them. And as I said, don't interrupt them. Let them go through their whole train of thought. So those are just some of the very key common sense things that we try to instill upon our deacons. You just need to be present, and you need to not be distracted, and you need to not be already forming a response. You need to really hang on to every word.
And body language is terribly important in this, as Robin alluded to. Sitting with somebody, as we all know, there are different ways of doing it, and the way in which we're sitting and the way in which we're looking all impact the message that we're returning to that person who's talking to us. And so that ability to respond physically to their presence in a way that makes them comfortable is non-threatening in any way.
Thank you very much. I'm curious, are there any other questions out in the field that y'all want to offer for us? I'm not seeing any. Scott and Robin, do you have any last words for us as we're getting ready to conclude tonight's conversation?
Well, I'll start by saying I really appreciate this opportunity, and I hope that those who are with us today got something that they can use, and it spoke to them. And anyone who happens to be watching this through a recording, that again too, they know that they can reach out to us, and we're here to support, help, answer questions, and do whatever we can. But thank you for the opportunity.
And I too would like to say thank you.
Well, we're very grateful for you sharing your experience and your wisdom with us. I know for myself, even when I am familiar with topics that we've been able to listen to together, that I always get new insights by hearing how things are happening around the country. And to learn from your experience, particularly in Arizona, is a great gift to us in New England. So thank you on behalf of all of the diaconal community in New England and across the church that are able to be a part of this, both live and online. As I've said at the beginning, the Deacons Talking on the Road to Emmaus is a joint sponsored program from the Episcopal Province of New England, Province 1, and from the New England Deacons Network. We have recorded these programs, and they're available on the YouTube channel that's connected with the Episcopal Province of New England's website. That's province1.org. So feel free to go back and see not only tonight's presentation, but also a whole host of other wonderful conversations from deacons, primarily in New England, but also around the church, that are doing some amazing ministry. They give us great ideas for ways that we can renew and support the work that we're trying to do to live into God's mission for us in this world. So thank you for all that have participated. I like to close our Deacon Talking conversations with the Franciscan prayer. So if you don't mind just taking the deep breath, letting go, and letting yourself be bathed over this, we'll end the evening with this prayer. May God bless you with discomfort at easy answers, half-truths, and superficial relationships, so that you may live deep within your heart. May God bless you with anger at injustice, oppression, and exploitation of people, so that you may work for justice and freedom and peace. May God bless you with tears to shed for those who suffer from pain, rejection, starvation, and war, so that you may reach out your hand to comfort them and turn their pain into joy. And may God bless you with enough foolishness to believe that you can make a difference in this world, so that you can do what others claim cannot be done, to bring justice and kindness to all our children and to the poor. We ask this all in Christ's name. Amen. Blessings to you all. I hope your Advent season is fruitful and your Christmas is blessed. Good night.
Night. Thank you.